Okay, we're going to start tonight's meetings with announcements, and I will start on my right with Ms. Niedergang. Any announcements?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you give me a minute? Thank
Why don't we start on the other side, and we'll go opposite direction tonight. So-
None from me tonight.
Okay. Ms. Frog,
None
any
this time.
announcements? Mr. Quinn? Ms. Crowler?
No announcements. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I forgot to send myself the crucial email with what I was going to say, so I'm going to wing it a little bit. I just wanted to say that at the Board of Health meeting that was held on Tuesday, there were two new ordinances concerning vaping that were introduced, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to be as specific as I would like. One of them concerned the banning of flavors for vaping products sold in Princeton. And the other had something to do with, I think, extending the ban on vaping on athletic fields and other areas related to the schools, not actually inside the schools. And I'll try to get that exact language sent to the clerk for inclusion in the minutes. But that's the best I can do for now with my recollections. So, thanks.
Okay, I have a couple announcements. The first is we're going to be having a flurry of meetings over the next couple weeks, so I just wanted to remind both my colleagues and invite everybody here to those meetings. So the first one coming up will be on this Wednesday, December 11th, starting at 5 p.m. It'll be in the other building at Monument Hall, and that's our police promotional ceremony. We also have a regular council meeting on a week from tonight, Monday, December 16th, and we're going to be having a special meeting on affordable housing on December 18th, and I have an announcement about that I will read right now. So we are pleased to announce that Princeton is close to reaching a settlement with Fair Share Housing on our affordable housing plan. If all goes as planned in finalizing the agreement, Council will be holding a special meeting on Wednesday, December 18th at 7:30 p.m. for a public presentation of the settlement agreement and a vote on the first set of items that Council will need to act on in the coming months. Princeton has long been committed to building affordable housing, demonstrated by the many developments built throughout town, most recently the Avalon Bay development at the old hospital site and Merwick-Stanworth, with over 100 affordable units between them. In our negotiations with Fair Share, we have pushed for a plan that meets our obligation while at the same time supporting the goals of economic diversity, adequate housing for our seniors, and development rooted in the smart growth principles of building in areas with access to transit, shopping, and jobs. One of the most difficult aspects of pulling together this plan has been operating under the constraints of a legal process directed by the courts instead of an open planning process prescribed under regulations that should have been established by the state legislature. We have tried our best to protect the interests of the community by following the advice of legal counsel to keep negotiations confidential while communicating with the community as fully as possible under these constraints. Much of the plan Council will be considering on the 18th reflects the draft plan presented to the public in May of 2018. Princeton's obligation remains the same at 753 affordable units required to be built between 1999 and 2025. We have already built 256 units for which we will receive credit. We are also eligible for a sizable number of bonus credits. One major addition to the May 2018 plan is the addition of the former Save Animal Shelter site, which will produce 64 affordable residences in an 100% affordable development. In addition, as has already been publicly announced, the town has been in discussions with Avalon Bay Communities Incorporated about development at Thanet Circle. There will also be some adjustments to the new housing component at the shopping center, a spot that is widely viewed as a promising location for housing since it is close to shopping, transit, and jobs. The meeting on December 18th will be a significant milestone in our affordable housing planning process. However, it will not be the final step by any means. Assuming we reach a settlement, the next step will be a fairness hearing tentatively scheduled for February 7th to determine whether the terms of the settlement agreement in the eyes of the court create a realistic opportunity for development of the court-mandated affordable housing units. Once the settlement is approved by the court, the municipality will be given several months to adopt the related zoning ordinances and prepare other documentation to demonstrate compliance. We want to thank the community for your patience as we work to craft a plan that meets the important goals of adding diversity to our housing stock, providing adequate housing for our seniors, building in areas within walking distance of transit, shopping, and jobs, and energizing our local economy. We look forward to sharing the details of our progress with you on the 18th. And with that, are there any staff announcements? Nope. Okay. Then we move to one of the best parts of tonight's agenda, which is the award of recognition for our crossing guards. And before we come down to hand out the awards, and I want to invite all my colleagues on council to join me down there, I just want to express our thanks to the crossing guards in our community. You guys have one of the most important jobs there is, which is keeping our kids safe. One of our goals is to make this a more walkable, bikeable community, and it really starts with our kids leading the way, and people want to make sure in order to have their kids walk or bike to school that they're going to be safe, and you all out there every day help to give people that sense of security, that there's going to be someone there helping them across the street. And you all do it so well. And a lot of us, our kids growing up, you're like a third parent to them as they go to school. And it really makes Princeton a community. So we want to thank you for all of your work. And I'm sorry that the weather tonight is so horrible. And it just goes to show that you guys are out there, rain or shine. Lately, last few days, not so shiny, unfortunately, but you help bring a smile to everyone's face. So we really want to thank you for the job that you do. All right, now we're going to hand out the awards. And I also want to ask Sergeant Murray for his help, too. Fearless leader. So first is Annette Iovino. Okay, so this is in formal recognition of your first year of dedicated and professional service to the municipality of Princeton as an outstanding school crossing guard. So this is for you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next is Robert Renkarge. And also in formal recognition of your first year of dedicated and professional service to the municipality of Princeton as an outstanding school crossing guard. Yeah, thank you. Congratulations. There you go. Okay. We also want to honor Tiffany Smith. She's not here tonight, but we'll clap for her anyway. She can watch the video. And it's also Tiffany's first year. Next is Cynthia Parker. There you go. Thank you. And it's also Cynthia's first year, so it's great to have this big crew of first years. Okay. Next, let's give it up for Howie Mesler. Howie couldn't make it here tonight, but this is his second year of being a crossing guard, and he's also one of our parking enforcement officers. So probably gets more smiles being a crossing guard. Edith Juarez. Thank you. Congratulations. And Edith was celebrating 2 years of crossing guard service. Next is Nikisha Ammons. And Nikisha is also celebrating her second year of being a crossing guard. Congratulations, thank you. Bob Swierzak, 3 years. I know. Thank you very much. Okay. James Ferry, let's give it up for James. He can be here tonight. And Jim's also our animal control officer. Yvette Felder. Let's give Yvette a round of applause. And Yvette has been a crossing guard for 3 years. Patricia Conlon, 3 years as crossing guard.
Everybody.
Congratulations, thank you. Morris Cordona. Morris is also a parking enforcement officer. He could not be here tonight. Marie Carazone. She's not here tonight. Let's give her a round of applause, though. Okay. Patty Mahar, is she here? I don't think so. Let's give her a round of applause for 4 years. Anthony Perone, 4 years. Thank you. Derek Enriquez for 4 years, or 5 years. Scott Goldsmith, 5 years. Gregory Glasson for 8 years. Dan Hudson, 8 years. Congratulations, thank you. Raymond McDowell, 8 years. Alex Moise, 8 years. He couldn't be here tonight either. Gerald McFarland for 9 years. He's not here. Brian Petrone, 10 years. Joe Scullion, 11 years with the Princeton Rec Department, too. Oh, excellent. Fern Sproul, 13 years. And I just heard Fern try to retire, but we wouldn't let her, so thank you.
Hold you back in on community night out.
Fern crosses me all the time, so I really appreciate Fern.
Elise Tsankova, 16 years. Wow. Wow. Russell Clayton, 24 years. Thank you so much. And Sergeant Murray just told me that Russell's missed 4 days over that 24-year period. So he's a hero. Let's give him another round of applause. What? This is hard to believe. Constantino Tomasi, 47 years. Do you want to say something? Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to make 2 bits of special recognition. What the mayor said about Russell Clayton. His work ethic is second to none. Like I said, when I tell you I can count on one hand how many times he's been absent in that amount of time, I'm telling you the truth. Only to be outdone by Mr. Tomasi, who has 47 years of service to the town. Over his tenure, he covered 7 different crossings, and he actually began at the intersection of Cherry Hill and 206 when there wasn't a traffic signal there. So I don't have enough good things to say about him. It was an absolute pleasure serving as his supervisor during, let's say, the last 15 years of that 47-year career. And because of that, he's getting another certificate of appreciation. So we are going to make you get up again. All right? This one is from me. In special recognition of your 47 years of dedicated and professional service to the Princeton Police Department and the municipality of Princeton as Princeton's longest tenured and most dependable school crossing guard. Your displayed level of commitment to the Princeton community rates second to none. Sergeant Thomas R. Murray III. Come on. We can get 47 years.
Well, I was really trying for 50,
I tried to talk him into it.
right?
I did.
I thought it,
I tried to talk him into it.
yes, medical stuff happened, and I couldn't do 50, but I would love to had to do 50.
So, truth be told, without getting too personal and invading Mr. Tomasi's privacy, but I feel it's appropriate to say, in true professional fashion, he came to me over the summer before he decided to retire and told me that he thought he had another year in him, maybe 2, but he would rather come to me and do it on his own terms than to have to tell me that he couldn't start and then continue on. So just a mark of a true man of character, utmost integrity, and just a pillar of Princeton community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We now come to public comment, which is for comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. And we'll start with the sign-up sheet, and then we'll open it up to anybody else. So first up is Paul Shore.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful ceremony, an amazing contribution. I wanted to follow up to a council presentation made several, maybe months ago, about construction activities along Harry's Brook and between Harriet Drive and Harrison Street. At that time, subsequently and very quickly afterwards, Administrator Mark Dashiell met with us and engineering and coordinated a meeting with engineering department. Thank you very much. And the engineering department has been terrific in helping to unravel this issue. At which time it became apparent at that meeting that there were violations of the stormwater management ordinance, at least to me. I'm not sure that everybody agreed with that. And then there has been an ongoing attempt to rectify the problem, but I don't believe that has succeeded. I don't think we have a final resolution yet. I'm not certain of that. But last week I gave to the engineering department 3 videos during daylight of Harry's Brook overtopping its banks in May, June, and July. So I just wanted to encourage council to keep this on their agenda. I noticed there's a resolution on an ordinance related to stormwater management. I'm not sure to what extent that could relate to Harry's Brook or not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Cohen, do you have a question?
Mr. Shore, I just wanted to mention that when I was at the League of Municipalities conference a couple weeks ago, I actually attended a workshop on flood prevention, flood mitigation, and I spoke to one of the presenters about specifically the question you had regarding flood insurance. And I can follow up with you, after, maybe by email, just to let you know what I learned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on an item that's not already on the agenda? Okay, so we'll move on then to reports, and we'll start with the September police report, and I'd like to invite up the chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Before getting into the police report, I just wanted to bring something to everyone's attention. I don't know if anybody saw this week, the Attorney General released a new police initiative. He coined the Excellence in Policing Initiative. And the Excellence in Policing Initiative, and you can find it right on the AG's website. It's a state Attorney General approval. It's the most comprehensive police reform, really, in modern times, probably, at least the last 30 years, definitely, probably more than that. And it addresses a real vast variety of contemporary criminal justice issues, a lot dealing
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just make sure you're talking right in your mic?
Better? Thank you. And a lot of the issues relate directly to policing. Some are prosecutorial, but it's very deep, and I invite you to look at it. But I did want to bring some things up that I, after reading through it, are going to affect us directly, probably, starting next year. There's going to be a lot of training and a lot of policy changes, I think, that we're going to be seeing in all police departments, including ours. One of the things relates directly to use of force. So we talk about use of force a lot on a local level. And last year there was a report done by the Star Ledger that basically created its own database on the use of force. And from this report, the AG is mandating that all use of force be immediately reported through an online portal by every police department in real time, almost real time, to the Attorney General's office. This is a great thing. It's something I think we welcome. It'll allow us to monitor ourselves how we compare against trends in the state, and it also provides, I think, a lot of transparency and a lot of confidence in that the Attorney General will be getting this and maintaining this, which wasn't happened previously. So that's a really good thing. Not a big investment of anything on our end other than the reporting and training issues that we'll tackle there. The second thing that caught my attention was the new early intervention system. I've spoken here before about the early warning system. Our early warning system that we've had for quite some time, but was mandated by the Attorney General last year, basically tracks 14 policing conducts that anything from like a motor vehicle accident to more serious things. And the system allows us to monitor what may be bad trends of an individual officer on an individual basis. It allows us to aggregate different things and look at it. In looking at it statewide, the Attorney General, in forming a task force, found that it was creating it was supposed to be a positive type of intervention system. It was being viewed negatively, I guess, by some departments as a punitive action, which kind of worked against its purpose. So he is, with the resiliency program that he instituted, he's now labeling this new system an early intervention system. And what this system, it's a very kind of a high-tech system in which it's going to monitor all types of scientifically proven conduct and actions by officers, not necessarily improper actions, just all actions that an officer takes in all different types of policing issues that he or she deals with on a day, and analyzes it and gives feedback to the administration on trends based on this scientifically proven data. That's the best explanation I can give. It's called an early intervention system because rather than just monitoring what we would call bad behaviors, it's monitoring all types of behaviors and benchmarking it against the officer's peers. And it's analyzing these types of trends. So how do I see that affecting us? I probably see it being like a software issue. I see this being done through, I don't know whether it's going to be maybe a software that's provided by the state and it's done through them, or it's something that we're going to have to fund locally. So I'll be bringing that up again. That caught my attention because I think it's really progressive. I think it's a great thing. I just see there being, some implications locally about how it's going to be done. So I think that's probably something that we can address at public safety going forward. And then finally, the last thing that I thought was good to bring up is there's been a complete change to the internal affairs guidelines by the Attorney General. Probably one of the most important documents that the Attorney General has issued. And it's a comprehensive change. It's a big change. And there's going to be a large training component. There's going to be training from the Attorney General's office to the prosecutor's offices, and then they're going to train us. I'm going to a meeting actually in later December on this. So I just wanted to highlight a couple things that I thought were interesting for the public to know. And again, I would invite you to look at this online, but this is a summary of changes that he issued. The first one I noted was the order now facilitates a review of the disciplinary history of an officer who seeks employment with another law enforcement agency. There's been ongoing problems nationally with what we would consider troubled officers, if you will, officers that have had trouble in one department, possibly signing like non-disclosure agreements with their department, leaving that department, applying for employment at another police department, maybe across state lines in the same state, and what you find is that the conduct is just being spread to other police departments, and police departments are unwittingly possibly hiring people they wouldn't otherwise hire. This is now to be prevented by this order, in which all police departments have to disclose all internal affairs files to possible employers of other police departments. So if one of our employees seeks employment somewhere else, we have to provide all disciplinary and internal affairs files. This is a good thing for hiring and for policing in general. The second thing I highlighted, accepting reports of misconduct. I thought this was very interesting. The Attorney General is now mandated that all reporting complaints and the standardized report form be made available by all departments in the mandated multiple languages that he has enumerated on his website. And he provides a link for us that we can put that on our website, and they can access the forms, and they can be accessed in multiple languages. It also clarifies that agencies must accept complaints from undocumented immigrants and should establish those complaints, systems for the receipt of those complaints by telephone or email. Basically, it just makes it so easy for a member of the public and gives confidence to members of the public to not fear coming forward to report misconduct. Obviously, that's been an issue in the past. It says that all complaints against department executives, so for the chief or the chief's command staff, are now investigated by the prosecutor's office. That's great transparency, especially for members of the department, where they can be confident that if they report something internally, that it goes outside the agency and is investigated by someone outside the agency. That gives confidence to people to come forward and ensure that their complaints being investigated in an unbiased way. And then finally, it just establishes a new timeline that makes internal affairs complaints adjudicated quickly. So we have to provide a reason, the investigator has to provide a reason to me if the complaint goes outside of 45 days. And that's a good thing, because historically some of these things can be complicated and they can go on for a long time, and that really reduces some of the confidence the public has in the police department. So those are just some highlights that I wanted to bring to you to let you know. Like I said, it's way more expansive than this, but these were some of the things that caught my attention. I thought I'd bring them up, and I can answer any questions on it, or I can answer questions on the monthly report.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for that report, and that is very interesting news. Is that directive going to be made available on the webpage?
Yes, so we go to training on December 18th at the county, and we're going to be given instructions on how to proceed with the information going on the webpage and with instituting the new policy. I think the actual policy takes effect officially in March.
Okay, thank you. And then I just had a couple of other questions regarding the monthly report. And just seeing some of the numbers from the previous year to this year, I was just wondering whether it was something that fluctuates, or if it's just on trend with every year for this time of the year. On the one was that I took note of was the increase on controlled substances from 1 in 1918 to 7 this year. And then there were, the other one was just some of them are drops. For example, dropping complaints, noise complaints, and then an increase in the school crossings and school detail. So I don't know if you could answer if there's a reason behind those increases, and then the drop in the reported instances.
Sure. The CDS marijuana arrests, those outcomes per month are actually fairly low, both of them. But I would suggest that it's not a trend, but probably rather related to one or two incidents. Sometimes there's multiple arrests on one incident, and that'll count as multiple offenses. With regard to noise complaint, that is a substantial, let's see.
That was a decrease.
Yeah, that was a substantial decrease. I can actually look at that and see. I'm venturing to guess that there's specific reasons that led to that 113 is probably high, and it's probably related to specific incidents that are being reported repetitively, but I'll look into that.
Okay. And then one last thing that I noticed in your use of force reporting, something perhaps I just hadn't noticed that before. I think, are you listing now the case numbers?
Yes.
And is that in order to identify when there's more, maybe looks like there's more instances, but it's related to one case?
That's correct, and that's an excellent point. Yeah, that'll help us look at, how many cases were involved versus how many incidents of force, and helps to delineate when there's multiple officers that I always talk about. So it may be one incident, but 3 officers equals 3 instances. And it also just helps me when I get the report, I will look back at the case and just review the facts of the case and all of the reviews that were done on it in case anything strikes me that I want to report here that's maybe
Well, that makes sense, because I
a
think you
little
had
bit
mentioned that before, that
Yeah.
when we had questions about that, but thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, it's not in the report, but I wonder if you could walk us through the response on Friday at the high school, what you can say about that and how that whole thing happened, the cooperation with the schools.
Absolutely. We were alerted to a call that Princeton High School staff received of a what we consider a generalized threat of violence against the school. And the school, I should preface this by saying we have such a great relationship with our schools, especially our public schools. We work, so often with them in responding to these types of situations and training and going through their emergency procedures. So it really is kind of a flawless interaction, but we responded there per our protocols. They had all their protocols in place across all their schools. And, what we've learned from experience from these is really to try to quickly ascertain the credibility of it, of the threat, which, it's a difficult thing, but also to do it with the most minimum disruption to the school day for the students. That's our main concern is keeping everybody safe, but the disruption and the fear that it causes amongst the students is also a concern. And I think the school staff has just gotten so great at that, and I think our staff as well. So we're able to, we get to the scene, do our initial investigation, ascertain the legitimacy of the threat, and quickly come to a decision that the best way to proceed is to keep the students inside the school in the shelter in place, which is kind of the least intrusive type of protective measure to take, and for us to have an extra watch at the school. So we do call in, and we have a protocol in place where we can get officers in a pretty quick period of time and get them stationed at the schools. We notify all our other schools locally, and we proceeded with normal operations at the schools otherwise, and for us the rest of the day, we continued the investigation. And unfortunately, we've got it down to a science, but it took practice, and the practice is unfortunate, but at least there's a positive thing that comes out of these types of threats, if you will, is that we can do it with the best interests of the students in mind and minimizing that disruption. So that investigation continues. I was very happy with the way everything went there. It was really flawless, and the superintendent and I have talked many times since that afternoon about follow-up, and I think that's the best outcome that we could have.
So was this is different than the swatting incidents that we were living through a couple of years ago?
Yeah, yes. So the swatting incidents that we experienced were more of a extensive type of threat that was entailed a lot of cloaking and a lot of computer-generated kind of messages. This was a live message, which poses a different type of investigation. So quite different from our perspective, but not so different to the response.
Thanks, Chief.
Ms. Niedergren?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chief Sutter. I'm excited to hear about the AG's plan, the commitment to excellence in policing, and I have just two questions about that. So I was typing furiously, so I may have missed something. Did you say that every internal affairs complaint would go to the AG's office?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So what I was referring to is internal affairs complaints against the chief executive or the command staff.
Okay.
So what that really is, I think, geared to, just to clarify, is a complaint that comes internally from a employer officer against a superior. Instead of it being investigated by another superior, it goes outside the department to the prosecutor's office, which really is the proper way of doing it and gives it, unbiased type of approach.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think that could be right, because then they would do nothing else. And then the issue about officers transferring from one department to another and previously being able to hide through an NDA or something, a non-disclosure agreement, that they may have been investigated or found guilty of something. How do you handle the possible concern that someone might have, like all of a sudden now the stakes are much higher for somebody, because you're not, for an officer against whom a complaint is made, because
Right.
you're not only jeopardizing their situation here with this current employer, but you're putting a big black mark on them forever. How do you deal with people's maybe natural reluctance, whether it's within the department or without, to do something that might, where the stakes seem so much higher? I don't know if you've had a chance to
that's actually
think about that.
That's actually a really excellent point. So I can speak to our department, and it's probably known, it may not be known, but for us, I would in the past never recommend to council the hiring of someone that didn't disclose a internal affairs file. So if we were doing a background on a prospective other police officer, and through our background investigation put in a request for a internal affairs file, and we were met with a non-disclosure agreement, that would terminate, from my perspective in the past, for me, that prospective employee, because it's just an indicator. So, but your point is well taken, and I think where it has to rest is in the comprehensiveness of the new guideline. There's a lot of information in here and a lot of safeguards for the officer as well. It really demands independent investigation. It demands thoroughness, and it also you'll also see in there, if you have time to read it, it's a pretty lengthy document, but it also has increased the general access for internal affairs files, which have historically been really privileged. It opens that up a little bit. So your concern is really kind of, I hadn't really thought about it, and it's very on the mark, and I think I would answer that just by saying it would hopefully show the importance of good conduct on our part, and then it would also show the importance of the thoroughness and independence of investigations, and the ability of investigations, what the document also does, of having those investigations reviewed by a higher authority, whether it be the attorney or the prosecutor or the attorney general. And that is in this new guideline, where anyone that's unhappy with an investigation may have it looked at by the prosecutor's office. It also mandates mandatory inspections of our internal affairs files by the prosecutor's office. So I think he did put some good safeguards in effect, to address that point, but it's really well made. I definitely agree with it.
Ms. Grimiller?
I have a question, but are you staying for the next presentation? Okay, because I'm curious about how many miles a shift does a police car drive? But I know we're going to talk about this in the next thing, but I was just curious. Do you know? I mean, you don't know if
It's dependent on the. It's odd because I go back to my own. I don't look at those every day. A lieutenant does, but I go back to my own experience. When you're busy, the miles are lower because you're not driving as much.
Yeah.
Because when it's a slow. So on midnights, we tend to put on the most miles. An active patrol person, a very proactive patrol person with a limited amount of calls could approach 90, 100 miles in a 12-hour shift.
Okay.
It's usually probably more like 50-ish
Okay.
when there's a reasonable amount of activity.
Have you looked into electric police cars?
I actually had the opportunity to meet with our lieutenant today and look at them, and I was actually really impressed by by one of the hybrids. That is very, very. I mean, we would be all accepting to look at them and see how. I actually had a idea on how we could, in the police department, begin to look at it and see how it would work for us on a low kind of. Starting on a limited basis and seeing how they work.
Because I was surprised in that report to read that it's required. I mean, I had heard police officers say you have to have the car on all the time, and it's like, ugh, it seems so wasteful.
Not all the time, yeah, but like on traffic.
But with an electric car, you just start right up.
Exactly. I think the technology is really, really great, and it's definitely exciting to look at for us. It's something new and exciting, really.
Ms. Williamson?
One quick comment and question and follow up on it. Right here. I just have to say, looking at the Excellence in Policing Initiative, that our current Attorney General, Gabriel Graywall, has got to be, in my experience, one of the most progressive, if not the most progressive AG I've ever seen. And I'll add to that I have to commend you, Chief Sutter, just from what I've noticed with a lot of the training that our force undergoes and just with the forward thinking that it's just good to have a town where our local department is on the same page as our Attorney General. Because I know there's some other towns in our, I think, 565 municipalities in the state that aren't in lockstep in that regard. So I commend you for that. And on the question part, I know with some other towns, their internal affairs offices are physically separated from the main police facility. I guess I could guess why that is. So if folks want to report anything, they don't feel intimidated. And I'm not sure what the policy is here in our town.
Right. So our internal affairs is considered under the guideline what's considered part-time. So thankfully we don't have the volume of complaints for like a full-time internal affairs department like a larger community might have, where they have an off-site location. So the commander of our unit is the captain, and designated the captain for being the highest ranking next to me, because I can't investigate internal affairs. I have to be responsible for the resolution of them and making a decision based on the investigation. So by naming the highest ranking officer in the department, the captain, that allows him to run and conduct investigations and oversee the investigations. That being said, his office is downstairs in the police department, but I know in some of the more full-time cities, they'll have internal affairs off-site for the exact reason that you said. I will say that a way around that obstruction of having to come to the police department is that you can file a complaint literally absolutely any way that you could think of. You could send it on social media. It could be sent anonymously on email. We have a link on our website that it can be sent anonymously. It could be handwritten on a piece of notepaper and left at the police department. We will accept that as a complaint with as much information as the person wants to give, because that is a barrier to some people having to walk into the police department. It's uncomfortable for some, and we recognize that. So it's a good point.
Thanks.
I had a couple questions. So I just want to echo what Mr. Williams had said. Like, we're really just so thankful that our police department and you in particular have been so on top of this and are already collecting a lot of the data that the state is asking for. Has the state said, like, is this just going to be on some open database for everybody, or have they said how we're going to be able to interact with all this information that they're collecting, and have you thought about how it might be useful for us as a, you know, as opposed to it just being like another reporting exercise?
Yes. So the internal affairs information is absolutely going to be reported quarterly by us and annually, as we do on our website. But I have to look into whether it's going to be done in a statewide format. I'm not sure. It would be, we would like it that way because it helps us to compare things. So I'm not sure about if he's going to aggregate it and put it somewhere. The same thing with the use of force information. It doesn't, in the information I read, it doesn't specify how it's going to be put out to the public, but I would, based on where the AG has gone with all of these initiatives, it's a lot of it is transparency based and providing information back to the public. So I have to think there's going to be some component of it that's going to be public. That's my, I'm really guessing at that, but that's my, I think it's probably accurate, fairly accurate.
And since you're here and since we have the promotion ceremony on Wednesday, I just wanted to just ask you to brief council and the public that's here just about the changes going on within the department. And I mean, we've brought on a lot of new officers because we've had so many retirements, and now we're going to be promoting some folks. But if you just give an overview
Sure.
of where we are and even what, you know, there's more changes that might be coming too as the people in the, I mean, nobody
Yes.
gets old here, but.
Yes. we are in the, definitely in the next 2 years, most likely in the biggest transition we've had since consolidation, since we consolidated the two departments. It can be and it probably will be a pretty massive attrition of supervisors, very senior supervisors that you know, are hitting retirement age, and in the next 2 years or so, starting now, are going to be you know, possibly retiring. So we have to have a plan in place to deal with that, which we have and which we're executing. So right now, we are in the active process of backfilling Sergeant Williams, his vacancy. So what will occur is somebody will be assigned out of the current sergeants to Sergeant Williams' previous spot, and we have to fill that spot in the Patrol Bureau. That's where his replacement will come from. We're not adding spots, we're replacing. That has already been decided by our promotional process for Sergeant, and Sergeant Thomas, soon to be Sergeant Thomas, will be promoted on Wednesday, who is currently a corporal, and his promotion leaves a corporal vacancy. So from our corporal list, we'll be backfilling his spot, and that'll be Corporal Adam Passadimer will be being promoted to corporal on Wednesday as well. Our lists are by general order remain in effect for 2 years, and I really feel it was really important to establish that list, and I thank you for authorizing it now to do it, and it's going to allow us to look at our future supervisors, identify them, and start training. And in the next year, I think we're going to see a lot of internal change, and what you're starting to see is the department is really kind of, we're very young and we're really senior, I guess is the word. We have a lot of seniority, and there's you know, the group in the middle is kind of underrepresented compared to those two. So you're starting to see a really young police department, and that's so critical to supervision And that's why promoting these officers and these qualified officers to supervisory and command positions is so important. So I really appreciate your forethought and, recognizing this even last year and moving forward with it.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the chief? Right, thank you. The next report is on electric vehicles, and I'd like to invite up Christine Symington from Sustainable Princeton.
Is now it on? Yeah. Well, thank you for letting us come and present some of the research that Sustainable Princeton has been doing to provide information to the municipality about how you can transition your fleet to electric vehicles and also other types of alternative fuel vehicles. In the Climate Action Plan, there is a key performance indicator of how the community is doing in transitioning its fleets to zero emission vehicles, and it is that 75% of sedans and SUVs by 2035 should be zero emission vehicles, and 50% in medium and heavy duty vehicles should be zero emission by 2035. So no time like the present to start transitioning our fleets to electric. Wanted to give a little bit of an update on how the EV charging station has been doing in the Spring Street garage. That was installed in June of 2017. And there were some assumptions that were made when it was installed that people would use it, the public would use it for sort of convenience charging, sort of topping off. And that seems to have held true. The average session length of a charging session is 1.43 hours. And the manufacturer of that equipment helps you calculate, what you're doing in terms of reducing emissions. And so you can see since it's been installed, that station has helped avoid about 6,597 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's like planting 169 trees and then go for 10 years. The usage since it was installed has been going up steadily. So you can see that we were hoping that we would see, as more electric vehicles were adopted, that there would be more people using the station. I've heard anecdotally on the past few weeks from the folks who work at the garage that they are now having drivers that come in both parking spaces are full with cars that are charging, and a third electric vehicle will come in and ask, is there any more? So we're starting to see some times where, this is anecdotal, where there's a demand and both spaces are being used. And unique drivers has gone up. So in the beginning, we saw a lot of the same drivers coming in using it. They're probably residents or people who live nearby coming into town using it, but we're seeing more and more unique drivers. It's probably because there are more people transitioning to electric vehicles, but all trends are positive. So in terms of options for the municipality to convert its fleet to electric vehicles, there's sort of two different categories. First are the passenger vehicles, the light duty. We'd been waiting for electric vehicles to be added to the state contract, and there were 5 added in September. I have an example of 3 here. 2 pure battery plug-ins, and that's the 2020 Chevy Bolt and the 2019 Nissan Leaf. And it's very likely that there'll be a 2020 Nissan Leaf on there as well. They're at a slight discount to the MSRP, and you can see what their range is. The Chevy Bolt is a range about 259 miles. A Nissan Leaf is a range about 151 miles. And that range is probably sufficient for municipal staff that is using these light duty vehicles to provide them enough charge for the day to do their day-to-day. The town doesn't have that many miles in the road. They're not driving it a lot, with the exception of the freebie and perhaps the police, as Chief Sutter said. You're not putting a lot of miles on, so you don't really have to worry about the range. So you could get by with a leaf. You can buy them off the state contract. You can also purchase them off of the Sourcewell Purchasing Cooperative, the formerly known National Joint Powers Alliance, which was a way that is a platform that the municipality can use to buy equipment and vehicles. You can also lease. So there's an organization called the Climate Mayors that's established this EV leasing and purchasing cooperative using the Sourcewell contract. So the price is pretty similar to what you could buy a bolt or a leaf on the state contract, but they also offer these leasing options that the municipality could consider leasing instead of buying. Medium and heavy duty are a bit of a different story. I know some of council members own electric vehicles, and so for passenger vehicles, and they're becoming more widely adopted and on the road and affordable, and you can basically use it for your day-to-day needs without much inconvenience. Medium and heavy duty are a little bit of a different story. Vehicles that could replace a flatbed truck or a utility truck. This is a quote that I received back in the summer in looking at potentially applying for a Department of Energy grant, and a flatbed truck, purely electric, total cost is about $245,000 versus you could buy a regular Ford 350, 450 on the state contract for about $39,000 or $40,000. So the premium on these vehicles is still quite high. Same goes for a vehicle that could be used for the freebie. So that's sort of the orders of magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of the upfront cost. This also gives you a bit of a sense of the orders of magnitude in sort of more general terms. For heavy duty and medium duty, compressed natural gas or CNG is a more viable option. Those are already on the road. They're a little less expensive. For example, a garbage truck that might cost the municipality $100,000, you could get a CNG garbage truck for about $130,000. So you can see how that sort of fits in the middle between, or diesel or gasoline, heavy duty, medium duty, and an electric vehicle. So to sort of summarize, current electric vehicle options for medium and heavy duty without grants or incentives are double or more the cost of gasoline or diesel vehicles. Now the charging equipment, you could install charging equipment that would cost you about $3,000 to $6,000 for a level 2 charging station. And that could probably be enough to meet the needs of some of the heavy duty and medium duty vehicles because they're not driving a lot. They could operate on a full charge throughout the day, charge overnight, and a level 2 should suffice for some of them. For fast chargers, which you might need for the freebie, or if you want to get to a point where all your trucks on a heavy snow day need to be able to run for hours after hours, you might need some fast charging infrastructure. A cost for a fast charger is about $25,000 to about $30,000. Now the cost to install this charging equipment is very variable based on the location where you're going to install them. To install a level 2 charging station, you're talking around $10,000 to $30,000 depending on where you're locating it. The level 2 charging station, the Spring Street Garage, cost about $10,000 in installation costs. A fast charger is much more variable. The installation cost for a fast charger can be $25,000 to over $100,000. That is because it requires more power. If the site where you're going to install that fast charger is not near a power source that can supply 480 volts, you're going to have to upgrade in order to provide that type of power. You may need to work with the utility to provide additional, electrical upgrades. The distance between where your electric panel is and where you're going to have the charging station will also add to the cost if you have to trench and run wires. So that's why it's very variable. Now, the operation maintenance costs for these medium and heavy duty vehicles hypothetically should be less. There are less moving parts. You don't have to do oil changes. The manufacturers claim that they last much longer, where you might have to replace a truck every 10 or 15 years. They're saying, you don't have to replace this frequently. So if you're going to think you have to buy 2 trucks over a period of 20 years, you might only have to buy 1 electric truck over a period of 20 years. That's the claims that the manufacturers make. And the fueling costs should be low, depending on the price of electricity versus the price of diesel or gasoline. However, as you add more and more demand and you have more vehicles that are charging, you can incur what are called demand charges. And that's sort of known across the state and known as sort of an issue that as more and more municipalities adopt these electric vehicles and they're going to be plugging in, particularly if you have these fast chargers and they're going to be drawing a lot of electricity, you can get hit from the utility with these demand charges and get surprised by them. So it's still sort of unknown how that's all going to be managed, but that's something that you should be aware of. The municipality could consider CNG. As I mentioned before, the incremental cost is about $15,000 to $30,000. The fueling equipment cost, PSE&G may provide a compressor for no or low cost at a building currently serviced by natural gas. Obviously, they would like to sell you more, so they're going to make it easy for you to use that to fuel a vehicle. If that is not appealing to the municipality because you would be using natural gas that presumably came from fracking, what communities are doing is you can offset that use by buying energy contracts of renewable natural gas that came from a landfill or from a dairy farm digester to sort of help, offset that usage. In terms of emissions, they are about 30% less greenhouse gas emissions and 90% less particulate matter. The operation maintenance are better than gasoline or diesel. And I would say with CNG, they've been on the road a lot longer. Electric, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles are new. And so they haven't really been as tried and true in being used. So as I said, some of the things like how much they save in terms of operation maintenance, they're all sort of guesses. We don't have case studies to actually show how much, but it should be less. As Chief Sutter mentioned earlier, he was taking a look at, this is a police pursuit vehicle that is available in the Sourcewell purchasing cooperative right now, a 2020 police responder. This is a hybrid electric, so it's a plug-in and gasoline, and it could be a good option because if the police vehicle is at a construction site and sitting there, it doesn't have to idle because it could be running off the battery for a period of time. The cost on the contract is comparable to what you're paying for a pure gasoline vehicle. What we haven't had a chance to do with the police department is look at all of the add-ons you have to make sure it's a true price comparison, because it needs all the lights, it needs to be able to power all the computer and equipment. Just to be able to do a full cost comparison, including the fuel savings. You could put in a level 2 charging station to service this vehicle, and that should be sufficient. Another thing to think about with the police vehicles is installing idling reduction technology. because the cars have to be on in certain situations and idling, you can upfit a police vehicle with this idling reduction technology. Woodbridge, New Jersey is doing this right now. They're adding idling reduction technology to 3 2016 Ford Explorers. The purchase order they have for the equipment and the installation for the 3 vehicles was about $22,000. So, it's not, you're adding, a few $1,000s to each vehicle to upfit it. And hopefully they'll have a case study to share once they've got this in operation for a period of time so we could learn from. But it's something to consider while we're trying to transition all the fleets to electric, all the police cars. And Princeton University has them too. Yeah. So there is funding available to help offset the price of the electric vehicles. This just came out a week and a half ago. The New Jersey Board of Public Utilities announced that they will award, and I apologize for not having the price here, up to $4,000 per vehicle, and each municipality can apply for up to 2 vehicles, $4,000 off an electric vehicle. So a Leaf on state contract is $26,000. You could apply for this grant, you could get it for $22,000. You could also get up to $1,500 for electric vehicle charging station if you wanted to. But it's only $210,000 that they have available for this. So you do the math, that's not a lot of grants. So if the municipality is interested in applying for it, I would recommend doing it as soon as possible. The grants are going to be funded on a rolling basis, and then once they spend the money, you're on a wait list for the instance if they decide to refund it. They are looking to prioritize applicants which would be adding their first electric vehicle to their fleet, and I checked, and the parking enforcement vehicles do not count. Those are neighborhood vehicles, so that would be helpful for Princeton to say that it would be the first electric vehicle in their fleet. You have to, if you're going to have a charging station, get a charging station, you have to allow the public to use it when not in use by the municipality. You have to post signage, which I don't think that is a big challenge. But they are prioritizing applicants of communities that are environmental justice communities. So if you have 15% or more than residents are below the federal poverty level, you will get preference. Other funding option is the Pays to Plug-in grant. That was the grant that the municipality used for the Spring Street Garage project. They are still accepting applications. A few months ago, Council passed a resolution to apply for 2 level 2 dual port charging stations, one for 400 Witherspoon and one for Monument Hall. Those applications are pending the final estimates for the installation costs, which the engineering department is working on right now. So once those estimates are ready and the municipality knows what the full cost would be, we can submit that application. They will give up to $6,000 per dual port charging station, and if you make it available to the public, the municipality will get up to 100% of that $6,000. A level 2 dual port charging station, as I said, costs around $3,000 to $6,000, so it probably would not cover the entire cost of the project. You'd still have to find in the budget the amount to pay for the installation. The VW settlement is another funding option. Princeton submitted a project proposal in January 2018 to replace 4 garbage trucks, 4 pickup trucks, and 1 shuttle bus, the freebie. At the time, only the 1 freebie was eligible because the municipality at the time only owned 1 of the freebie buses. The proposal was not selected. The DEP will have a second solicitation in Q1 of 2020. So the municipality could submit that project proposal or refresh that proposal and submit it again. The projects that were funded for that first round of funding, there was only 1 municipality that got funding, and that was Jersey City, and that was for 5 garbage trucks. Again, the funding priorities for these funding opportunities are for environmental justice communities. So that is where that any application that is going to be for a community like that is going to get preference. Other funding option, and this is pending because it's being discussed at the state level, is Reggie. That's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The state has released a strategic funding plan scoping document to provide to residents and businesses in the community an understanding of the legal and regulatory frameworks surrounding the distribution of the Reggie auction proceeds. In their scoping document, the example initiatives that they have outlined, number one is clean transportation. So that's a good indication that there will be funding for local governments to convert their fleets to zero emission vehicles. Their funding priorities, again, number one, disproportionately impacted communities. So any application for these fundings would have to demonstrate that it's going to be put to use in Princeton to serve disadvantaged communities. So who's doing this? Franklin Township, pretty close to us, added 5 Chevy Bolts to their fleet back in April. They used the Middlesex Regional Cooperative Purchasing Program to purchase the 5 Chevy Bolts. They're being used by their construction code office. The charging stations are in a parking lot next to the Township Animal Shelter, and they're making it available to the public during the day. Jersey City is leasing 4 Nissan Leafs through that Climate Mayor's Electric Vehicle Purchasing Collaborative that I mentioned earlier. And they are also using a software service platform called Merchant Fleet for car sharing by the city staff. And Leonia added a Chevy Bolt to be used by the police for non-pursuit duties, and they used a Sustainable Jersey grant towards the cost. So they were able to purchase it by applying a $10,000 grant towards the purchase price. Other things for the municipality to consider are fleet management options. So Councilman David Cohen and I had a conference call with Enterprise, and there are probably other providers of this type of service where they look at your entire fleet and they help you right-size your fleet. So if there are vehicles that you could sell, help you consider options for sort of sharing of cars, and they can help you do that financial analysis and determine what that would mean in terms of cost savings and how can you reallocate those costs and how can you get to an emission reduction target. So that's something the municipality could pursue, looking into a different way to manage the fleet. So next steps is to get the quotes for the installation of the level 2 charging stations and get that application in the queue. It's first in, first out, and they probably have a lot of applications. So I would encourage municipality to get that in sooner rather than later, because you'll need the charging infrastructure in progress if you're going to buy an electric car for your fleet. I would encourage the municipality to apply for the Clean Fleet Electric Vehicle Incentive Program for light-duty vehicles. You can put in 2 requests for $4,000. Could be for that police hybrid or a Nissan Leaf. Evaluate the fleet management technology solutions like Enterprise more carefully. Resubmit a project proposal to the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust. Follow Reggie proceeds decisions closely for potential funding opportunities. But also make converting fleet to zero emissions a priority and top-down and departmental objectives. Sort of talked in, with various department heads about their willingness to incorporate electric vehicles into their fleets and to using them and get good getting good responses. Deanna said she'd love to have an electric car as part of her for municipal use. Bob Gregory, the head of Emergency Management Services, is interested in trying to get an electric or hybrid electric vehicle into use. So I think if all the different departments who utilize vehicles collectively make this a priority, that it'll just be it'll make it easier for the municipality to implement. I think the municipality really needs to position itself to be a good candidate for the federal, state funding and incentive programs by being prepared, by doing the understanding what the installation costs and the sites are going to be for charging stations. Knowing that is kind of critical to understand what the actual cost is going to be to install the equipment and figuring out how to prioritize the environmental justice opportunities. I think the municipality should also partner with Princeton Public Schools and other institutions and look on ways to collaborate on the charging infrastructure. If there are ways to sort of, share in some of the costs, but use that infrastructure in a way that it would help accelerate the adoption for all the different fleets, I think that would be wise. And also advocate for more EV options to be added to the state contract and other cooperative purchasing platforms. It makes it much easier to procure these types of vehicles if they are on the state contract. Alternatively, the municipality could issue RFPs to find someone to provide this equipment, but obviously that, takes time. But if you can advocate at whatever level to get these added to purchasing platforms, it would help. Any questions?
First of all, thank you. That was a great report and really exciting.
Yeah, I do want to add, I want to make sure that the cost does not dissuade you from really trying to incorporate heavy and medium duty vehicles into your fleet. I think it can be a little bit daunting when you look at the cost. You might say, okay, well, it's too soon, it's too expensive, and I don't want that to be what comes across. But I think you do need to understand that without the funding to help bring down the costs, it's going to be difficult to do it in a way that's economically feasible, but it's not impossible, and it should be a priority. Sorry.
Just sort of a comment to follow up on that. I think one of the promising things about the fleet management concept is that they can really help you look at life cycle maintenance costs, life cycle fueling costs, and those kinds of things can help to amortize the higher first cost of some of these vehicles. So, and Enterprise in particular, they have data, they have a fleet of millions of cars nationwide. Not all of them are electric, of course, but they have a lot of good data. So while it's a little bit guesswork for us doing the research at this point, they may be able to provide something a little bit more definitive.
Yeah.
The other thing is just kind of a random question that occurred to me as you were talking, but I think in terms of charging, it seems daunting to me to, have a charging station for every electric vehicle. I guess I'm being optimistic and looking a few years down the way when we might have 8 or 10 police vehicles, say, and to have 8 or 10 charging stations when really it only takes a couple hours to charge a battery. But it's hard to expect people to be coming, especially if we're going to make charging stations available to the public during the day, to say that employees have to come in at 2-hour intervals throughout the night to efficiently use charging stations. And I'm curious if you've come across any kind of solution to that in the research that you've been doing, where they're, sort of multi-headed chargers where you've got a couple of cables or 6 cables coming out of one head.
The only ones I've come across are the dual port, where it's one station with 2 ports, and so you could have 2 cars plugged in charging simultaneously. And that seems, I haven't seen anything that's got more charging ports to it. But you're right, if you're charging overnight, you're going to have 2 cars parked there for, let's say, 8 hours charging, when maybe they only needed 4 or 6 hours. And it's not like you're going to come in and
it's really less than that. I mean, yeah. Our Leaf charges in 3 hours,
yeah.
So.
Yes, it could vary. If it's a 220 volt, it can also depend on the amps that you have. So it could be between 3 hours or 4 hours, and the temperature can make a difference too.
Eve, do you have a question? Yeah, Ms. Niedergang?
I do. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Super informative. And I have a few questions, and I didn't get a chance to read over the new presentation as closely as the one that had been up previously. So forgive me if the questions are If we lease an electric vehicle, are there then any kinds of, I know there are still federal rebates for buying electric vehicles, and I'm not sure if there's state rebates. Do we get anything if we lease?
No, so the lease allows you to realize those federal rebates if there are any still available for that type of car, because as a municipality you don't pay taxes, so you can't take advantage of the federal tax. There is no current state rebates on electric vehicles, although there may be some in 2020, but the same thing holds true. So the leasing can be an option because the third party that you're leasing from takes the federal tax credit and then passes it through to you in the lower lease cost.
Okay. Thank you. That was helpful. So the compressed natural gas vehicles, which seem like a viable option now, although I'd love to see the math worked out. You said they cost 60 to 70% as much for maintenance and
less in maintenance. They cost less to maintain, about 0.7 or 0.6 less in operating costs than a diesel.
They're 93%. Okay, I misread that statistic. So 90. Okay, all right.
A little bit
okay,
less
so
in
that,
operations and maintenance. Yes.
It would be good to see, actual figures on that. I don't know if that's possible.
Sure.
And then the issue of buying something that fewer moving parts and it lasts longer. I have kind of a more philosophical question about that, which is if you look at the technology of cars, I mean, I tend to drive my cars for 20 years until they die. By the time you have a 20-year-old car, it really doesn't have a lot of the features. So I don't know if that's as important for, let's say, a garbage truck or a vehicle that's used. I would imagine up-to-date features would be maybe crucial for a police vehicle, but maybe not as much for, what Deanna tools around town in. But I'm just wondering, do we know enough to know whether it makes sense to invest in a vehicle with the idea that we are going to keep it for 20 years?
Yeah, I'm not sure as to what the future technology is you'd be missing out on. I think it's the chassis and the drivetrain that are going to last that long, and you could probably add on features that you needed that were required to do your job. I'm just guessing at that.
Okay.
I don't really know. Like I said, these electric buses and electric garbage trucks that you're reading about in the news, they haven't been actually in use to really know specifically if how it's panning out in operation.
Okay, and then two more questions. So one on the enterprise fleet management, which I had spoken a little bit with Councilman Cohen after we left the League of Municipalities. It sounded like a really exciting option, but I'm wondering does that mean, if you can look into the future a little bit, does that mean layoffs? Does that mean that we then reduce DPW staff here who are doing the maintenance and various other things like that? Because if enterprise or some other fleet management is doing that, are they doing it with our personnel here, or is that subject to discussion, or?
I don't think so. I think it would just allow them to do their job better. And David, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, basically the way Enterprise presents it is they offer a whole suite of services under their under their fleet management. One of them is maintenance on vehicles, and if you chose to use that service as part of the suite that you were taking advantage of, it could mean layoffs, although you could do it in a rolling way where sort of as retirements came up, you just wouldn't fill the position with a new guy who was doing vehicle maintenance, and it could dovetail nicely with the rate at which we're replacing gas vehicles with electric vehicles. But it is a potential implication to be considered.
Okay, and my final question, which is not really a question for you, but I want to know, and I'm not sure who I'm asking this of, but I'm just throwing this out there. So car makers are split in how they are supporting or not supporting California's new air standards. And I really do believe we are an entity that spends money. We purchase vehicles, and I would like to see about adopting a policy where we are supporting those manufacturers who are supporting the California clean air limits, which are, as far as I know, Honda, Ford, VW, BMW. I'm not proposing we actually really buy BMWs. And as the owner of 2 Toyotas, I feel like I will never buy a Toyota again because of this. But, I don't know to what extent that because I feel like that's it's more than symbolic. I think it really is important, and I'd like to see us explore focusing our purchasing power with those companies that are being more progressive.
Right. I would say for the heavy duty and the medium duty, the manufacturers there are some newer ones that are basically building them from the ground up. That's Proterra, there's some other names out there. But what's mostly when you see some of these are being deployed, it's basically a Ford chassis, and you have sort of an approved manufacturer that can add on electric drivetrain from another manufacturer. So the ones that I've seen most in use are just Fords with the chassis added onto it. So when you're looking at the light duty, those were all the Chevy, the Nissan. So if Ford's on your list and you're looking to add the heavy duty, medium duty vehicles, I think you're okay. Sure. And I do know that the one freebie is up to be replaced. The one is 2009. It was bought in 2009. That's how old it is. So if that's going to be a decision that has to come in front of council next year, I think it's obviously a really good time to try to figure out how to replace that with an electric option, and that should probably be a priority in figuring out how to utilize any funding or anything else to try to pay for that freebie bus.
Great. Ms. Fraga, and then
I promise
Ms.
mine are
Miller.
very quick and very basic because I'm not, and thank you for your presentation. I'm not familiar with electric vehicles, so I promise my questions are very basic.
You will be, because we'll all be driving them someday.
Yes, even in the future.
Yes.
So mine, you mentioned that the manufacturers have claimed that there's lower maintenance cost.
Yes.
But I wonder if there's enough information to determine how their longevity versus what's currently on our fleet.
Right. That's what, yes, the manufacturers will, in their specs say, this will last 20 years versus a gasoline or diesel vehicle, which you usually would replace after 10 years. But they haven't been on the road for 20 years to know, do they last 20 years? So I don't have data to back that up, that they do last longer.
So it can't really back it up. It's just assuming or
yes,
hoping. My other question is
I have no reason to doubt that it's not true. It's just that we don't have case studies to show that it's true.
And my other question, again, is very, very basic. If you mentioned also that there might be a requirement if we go to an electric vehicle fleet to make the charging stations available to the public. And I'm not familiar, especially like the one at the Spring Street Library. Do users pay to use this?
Yes, they pay to charge in addition to paying for parking, and the charge to charge really just covers the cost of the electricity and the software service municipality.
And so that would apply in this instance as well?
It's up to the municipality if you want to charge the public to charge. Most towns will do that in some cases to cover the costs of the service. They're not revenue generating types of things. So you can do that. And you can do that also to sort of incentivize turnover. If it was free, people would just put their car and leave it, and, when they probably should just charge at home and top off there. So you can use the charging to charge to encourage turnover, to maximize usage.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Crumiller, and then Mr. Williamson.
I want to go back to the beginning of the presentation when you talked about the Spring Street garage, because when I was looking at the chart, it seemed like the highest month was July of 19, and it looked like it was 4 sessions a day, and that was the highest use. And I'm just wondering if is that right, and is that considered good, or because it doesn't sound like a lot, but maybe it is from your perspective. With 2 stations, it's like 125 sessions over 31 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have you can run how many sessions you have per day, but it could be 4 sessions.
But is that,
4 different?
Because that doesn't sound like a lot to me. I mean, it sounds pretty low for 2, if you have 2 parking spots that are really only being used 2 times a day. But I don't know if that, because they're there for a long time, is that considered a high use?
You can also run it to find out, what the occupancy rate is. That, like, how often is there someone there during a 20? Like, you could do a 12-hour period or a 24-hour period.
But what I want to know is, like, do you consider that high?
I would say, I think high would be someone was parked there charging from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. But I think what the occupancy data is somewhere, I have to double check, but I think it was like between 25 to 30% of the time is there somebody charging there in that window of 12 hours during the day. I think I'd have to run that.
Okay.
Yeah, to find out. Do I think that's high?
I mean, to me, it doesn't sound like it's this roaring success. It sounds like it's not used that much, but because that's the highest, and most of the other months are lower. But I also don't know what the usual occupancy rate of a busy charging station might be.
I don't either, to sort of compare that sort of to others.
But does Sustainable Princeton feel that that is a success and that's a lot? I mean, I don't.
I just want to comment, it would be interesting to compare it to the occupancy rate for non-charging station spaces. I mean, it may be that most of the spaces in the garage are only occupied 30% of the time. I don't know, but we could find out.
Yeah, I don't know what the occupancy is, but I think because we see that it's growing, and because electric vehicle adoption is going to be growing, because more car manufacturers have said that at some point in the future they're only going to be making electric cars. When that happens is who knows, but at some point those stations will be used almost all the time, and there will be competition, and then you'd have to consider installing more.
Mr. Williamson, did you have a question?
Yes. My question is sort of a cross between a Sustainable Princeton question and a Princeton Police Department question. In my experience, I've never seen any police force use a traditional American manufactured vehicle as a patrol vehicle. I just never seen it. Like, I've always seen, whether it's here in Princeton, we tend to use Dodge Chargers. It seems you had your old traditional Ford Crown Vics and stuff like that, and other police departments. In your study, there's no distinction really made between cars that came from traditional foreign manufacturers. Even down today with globalization, sometimes it's hard to tell what's really a foreign car versus an American car. I just wanted to find out if, when it comes to getting access to, let's say, certain grants, maybe federal grants, et cetera, how much of an issue is having from what you can select from, how much of an issue is whether a car is traditionally manufactured by an American company versus a foreign company.
Right.
And I did notice,
Right.
like Jersey City, for example, uses the Nissan Leaf, which
Yes.
is traditionally Japanese.
So in prepping for this meeting, I was calling around to some of the cities that have been deploying these electric vehicles, and just making sure I had all my facts straight. There is a possibility that there are some grants, and I don't know if they're federal grants, where you have to use American manufacturers. You have to put the funding towards an American manufacturer of a vehicle, and that could be a challenge for some of the heavy-duty vehicles where you have maybe a Ford chassis and you have to use a manufacturer that manufactures its electric drivetrain in China. It may disqualify from the grant. So it's possible. is what I'm hearing, is this is something, when you read the details of these grants, that it could limit you from some of that. I don't know of, I haven't come across specifically in a grant where it was precluded, but it is possible in some of the grants, perhaps if they're federal, where you would be limited from using parts that were manufactured outside of the U.S.
Okay, and I don't know, Chief Sutter, if you could shed light on what also, and thanks for that answer.
Sure.
I don't know if that's a general policy issue, but just for my own, I'll just say unscientific analysis. I don't remember ever going anywhere and seeing a police cruise vehicle, like a patrol vehicle, that wasn't either a General Motors vehicle or a Ford vehicle. And the Chrysler now, it depends how you look at it, you know, it's Fiat, which is traditionally Italian, but apparently it's actually headquartered in Amsterdam, which I found interesting, but, or in the Netherlands, but it's a traditionally Italian company.
It is very, you're right. I think it's changing a little more now, nationally especially, but I've always found, like, so 20 years ago it was the Chevrolet Caprice, and then it went to the Crown Vic for a while, then it went to the Dodge. There's always a very common marketed car that the industry goes to. And I think one reason, at least that I know locally, is the aftermarket equipment, which I'm interested to see with this, how I bet they probably have a solution for it. But all the aftermarket equipment that we get, cages for the, and screens for the back, trunk vaults for our equipment, mounts for lights, even things, these little things that you wouldn't think of, the strobe lights that go in the front of the vehicle, in the back of the vehicle, are all standardized, and they're produced for these you know, very restricted manufacturers, Ford, Chevy. That's normally what I've run across. So when you go to an aftermarket distributor, it's very easy, to get the stuff, get it put in, and it's also easily transferable. So where we have saved in the past is if you have Fords for, you know, 6-7 years, when we buy a new car, we don't go after we don't have to get all the aftermarket equipment again. We take it, strip it off the old vehicle, put it into the new vehicle. And the more you change the vehicles, I guess the more expensive that becomes. So that's what I found in my experience to be the biggest reason, is that there's a standard vehicle that most places use, and all the aftermarket equipment is built for that vehicle. There's usually like 2 or 3, like you said. It's usually like Dodge, Chevy, Ford. I think that's getting probably, you know, it's expanding now. I'm seeing a little bit more of a variety. But you're right. And there's like no rule or law. It's just kind of the way that it's always been, and the state contract has a big piece of that in New Jersey as well.
Thanks.
Yep, Ms. Niederking?
Just a quick follow-up, primarily for the chief. So in terms of if we ever got to the point of adopting electric vehicles for the police, like, are the vehicles actually idle for long enough to actually charge? I mean, I don't know if, like, the officer does a shift and goes off, but does then somebody take that vehicle, or?
We have that's a great question. Yes, I think we would be able to make it work in theory, definitely, because the way we do our fleet management is we want the vehicle to only be used for the most of one shift and sit idle for one shift, so that we don't want it going 24 hours a day for the most part, that we can avoid it. The one problem that I see with that is the amount of extra duty work that we do, the traffic control. That's the one issue that we're having, is that we have so much construction zone, safety zone work going on, that we have to take cars from the night shift more often. So that's just something to consider, but theoretically, a car gets used on the night or the day and sits the opposite shift. And that's the only caveat to that. Perfect.
Yeah, Mr. Quinn?
Just want to add really quick, thank you. Thanks to Sustainable Princeton. We all feel that we're in this sort of fossil fuel limbo right now, where we know what's coming, and it's a thank you for showing us the way there. Just point out that there's one hybrid in use at Princeton Public Library. Their only vehicle is a gas electric hybrid. It's in its 5th year. There might be some data to extrapolate on fuel use. It mostly runs around town on the battery. It's a 2014 Ford C-Max hybrid.
So it's a plug-in hybrid, and it's not, yeah, okay, great.
So
Where do
you
you
might want to
plug it
check in with our facilities people. They all love it, by the way,
Yeah.
but they're not chasing bad guys in it.
But I would say for the purposes of that grant, it's not a municipal vehicle, the library's vehicle.
Right,
So
okay.
we're still,
Okay, we still can.
yeah, we
Right,
still should
right.
get our
We
points for
still
that.
don't qualify.
I had a question just about preparing our staff and our maintenance staff for this, for more electric vehicles. And did you come across any grants for training or any programs for maintenance training so that we can be equipped in-house to handle? I mean, I know it's that one of the advantages is there's less, but it's not like there's never anything.
I haven't come across any specific grants for that. You could always use a Sustainable Jersey grant for that. And when former Councilman Bernie Miller and I put together that VW settlement grant, we worked into that budget something for training and transitioning. I believe we checked that it was eligible, that you could incorporate that into the grant, that there would need to be something to make sure maintenance staff knew how to do it. I think we put in their budget to go talk to other municipalities that had done this so we could learn from them. So I think you could work it into maybe that grant budget or look at a Sustainable Jersey budget to do that.
Okay. And then I think hopefully you sense that there's a lot of excitement from council to move forward in some way on this. So I just wanted to talk with you about next steps and how to structure that. So you didn't say this in your report, but we would love Sustainable Princeton's help in writing some of these grants because you guys do such a great job.
Of course, yes.
And I know you've been working with PEC on some of this, and so it seems like maybe they're the right spot. I'm just trying to think of like who should work through the details of where it makes sense to, or I don't know if it's administration, because we have to make some decisions about where to focus our energy and which of this to
Right.
try to, that
I
we're
think-
best
Yeah,
positioned to
a real
win.
priority is figuring out where you're going to put the charging stations and figure that out and the cost and figure out how you were going to cover the.
One thing we'll
work
say,
end
one
of
thing we
budget.
sat down last week to look at the work plan for next year with Sustainable Princeton. One of the areas within that work plan is to look at electrical vehicles. So that's something I think that we'll work together on putting together moving forward. And it's already part of the plan. You'll probably see that at the beginning of first meeting in January for Sustainable Princeton for work plan for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. But, some of these deadlines are coming up soon too, so we want to
Yeah.
make sure that.
For the $4,000 one, I would say we should work pretty quickly to figure out, the grant application for that's not complicated, but I think you should just get in the queue. For the $4,000 towards an electric vehicle, you have to buy the vehicle by June 2020. So, and the application closes, I forget the date, but it was written there, but it's pretty soon. So get in the queue.
Right, and if there's other things that we should be doing to make ourselves attractive for these grants, because I know there are some things that we're not going to score well on, and so if there's other things we should be doing or can be doing,
I think it's
we wanna
readiness,
know.
showing that you're ready, showing that we've done the research and the homework. We know what our costs could be. We've got lined up, the quotes from electricians. We've got the site. We can have photos of the sites where the infrastructure is going to do. We've trained the staff on. I think those are the readiness things would make the applications look good.
Okay, great. Are there any final questions for Christine? All right, thank you so much. This is a really
Thank
great
you.
report.
Welcome. Great.
Okay, so now we turn to council reports, and I'll start on my right with Ms. Niedergang.
I would like to thank my son for going to my computer and sending me my document, which I forgot to send to myself. So now I have actually the information that I lacked before. So I do have a couple of reports from the Board of Health. So first, there was a vaping presentation, a really excellent presentation. I believe it was filmed, if anyone is interested. The two experts who were both engaging and really knowledgeable. And one of the questions that we don't really have an answer to yet is which is worse, smoking or vaping? It's pretty clear that if you do not use any type of nicotine, you should not start. But they really don't know yet. Smoking is really bad for you, but they don't have enough information to know at this point that vaping is better. But the rise in youth vaping since the introduction of the Juul, which apparently uses a different type of nicotine delivery system that is very attractive and really gives you both the nicotine that someone is looking for and in a very attractive way. It really youth use of nicotine products has just soared, and indication were that at our schools, the middle school and the high school, it's over 25%. And that a lot of people in the audience felt that was conservative. So as opposed to youth nicotine use had been going down and had been well below 10% prior to the introduction of Juul in 2016, 2017. So just a devastating kind of blow to our national health. I also want to report that about 15 members of the community came to the last Board of Health meeting, including several Princeton Public School staff members, to discuss the availability of well baby and child visits and routine vaccinations. We are not currently able to meet the demand for these services due to the increase of individuals in Princeton that are lacking health insurance. Children require immunizations to be admitted to school, so it's imperative that they have access to vaccinations. Additionally, several of the audience members stressed the lack of basic services. In particular, dental and eye exams and glasses are causing long-term problems for students and challenges for the school. The Board of Health is looking into ways to increase clinic space and clinic time in 2020. The Health Department will be providing free flu shots to children 6 months old and older with no insurance coverage. And information on how to make an appointment will be distributed through social media and the municipal website by the end of the week. So I think Health Officer Grosser already talked to us during our pre-budget meetings about needing additional money to cover these needs. So that I guess is something we'll revisit when we have our budget discussions. And then finally, picking up on the Sustainable Princeton theme from public transit, Sustainable Princeton presented another one of its Shrink Your Footprint events at the Public Library this past week, and the head of the Public Transit Committee presented information about how to get around Princeton without a car, and introduced the new Transit Princeton map, which will be mailed to every household in the community in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick report on a meeting we had last Friday of what I think we're calling the Northern Gateway Working Group. Basically, it's the SPRAB subcommittee that is working on trying to mitigate the negative impacts of the fueling station to the extent possible, along with staff, and the mayor and myself were in attendance. I think it was a productive meeting. The group is looking to take what they're calling a holistic approach to looking at screening of the fueling equipment, landscape, adjusting the landscape plan, and addressing issues of pedestrian and bicycle circulation safety and being more welcoming And it's their hope that if they can come up with a really comprehensive solution, it will really create a welcoming gateway in that area. The agreement was basically that we'd move forward expeditiously with removal of the canopy and replacement of the lighting at the fueling station. There was agreement that the completion of the current contract for the roadway improvements that's underway would be finished without any alteration. And then any other interventions will be put on hold until this group has come up with a plan that, with a comprehensive plan that everyone agrees on.
I do have just one quick report. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to join other Latino policymakers in Phoenix, Arizona, for a National Policy Institute on Public Finance Management and Bonds, municipal bonds. Attending the conference was not just educational, but I must say it was very empowering experience for me. Attending it afforded me the opportunity to increase my knowledge of local government budgets and finance issues. And I also gained some insight on the different funding options that may be available when working to meet the needs of our community. I did bring back educational materials on the topics that were covered, including the fundamentals of municipal bonds and on the different types of public-private partnerships. And although I imagine that several of my colleagues are already very knowledgeable on the topics, I would be happy to share if anyone's interested.
Councilwoman Niedergang beat me to it, but I was going to report on the teen vaping presentation. So, but I'll still thank Corner House, the Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance, Princeton's Health Department, the Princeton Police Department, and our other community partners for a very informative presentation. Just one major takeaway from it for me was that the primary way that our teens get access to jewels, et cetera, is not buying them over the internet, et cetera. Over 70% say they get them from someone else. So I posed the question to the professionals there, where do the someone else folks get them? And apparently, because we're near the Pennsylvania border, it's very easy to go to other states and get things in bulk. And then I guess after that, there's basically the underground economy where local teens find out who is the person who's the local distributor, and they get it from them. So it just makes it that much more difficult when folks who are of age or are willing to cross the border to get the supply are willing to share with our teens. But we just have to find better ways to confront that.
Great, thank you. Just to add briefly to Mr. Cohen's report, so at our next council meeting on Monday, the 16th, we'll be getting the implementation report from staff on the fueling station and where it stands. And one of the pedestrian improvements that recently went in is a tiny little triangle. Are we calling that a pedestrian? What's the pedestrian island? What's the
pedestrian refuge island?
Pedestrian refuge island. Just as someone coming through that intersection in a car this morning, I felt like it was a great improvement. It really makes you sort of slow down before you get to the stop sign there, which is so important when you're coming down the hill. So hopefully, as some of the other improvements go from paper to reality, we'll see the benefits of those. I had a report on the composting machine. So there's a letter that's going to be going out to participants tomorrow, and with council's patience, I'm going to read through it so no one here is surprised. So, dear Compost Program participant, at the end of January 2020, it will be 1 year since Princeton suspended its curbside composting program, the first such program in New Jersey. The cost for hauling had doubled. That and the lack of a nearby facility able to accept our waste forced the municipality to put the program on hold in hopes we could develop a more viable alternative. We have been working on addressing commercial users' needs and the needs of apartment dwellers, as well as resuming the residential curbside program. In August, Princeton Council voted to accept the donation of an industrial-strength composting machine from MetLife Stadium, with the capacity to handle up to double the waste generated by the recent curbside program. The town will pay to repair and move the machine. A subcommittee comprised of elected officials, municipal staff, and representatives from the Princeton Environmental Commission, the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, and Sustainable Princeton has been evaluating different approaches for partnering with an outside private entity to operate the machine and has recommended that the municipality auction the equipment. Multiple nearby entities have expressed interest in purchasing the composter, and we hope the ultimate purchaser would be ready to partner with Princeton if and when we are ready to restart the program. Whereas Princeton's curbside program has struggled from its very beginning with the lack of a nearby facility, a local option or options now could be within reach. Serendipitously, Trenton Biogas, a food waste to energy facility, is starting operations and offers another potential avenue for diverting Princeton's organic waste. We will continue to keep you posted on our efforts to restart the program. In the meantime, the new Sustainable Princeton website has useful information about composting at home. And Sustainable Princeton also reminds us that the best way to tackle our waste problem is simply to consume less and make smarter purchasing decisions. Thank you for your commitment to this important program for shrinking our carbon footprint. And wishing everybody happy holidays. And are there any staff reports? Ms. Stockton, Mr. Shaley, staff reports? No? Okay. All right, we'll move on then to resolutions. The first is 19362, resolution authorizing contract with CSAV Systems LLC for upgrades to main meeting room audiovisual equipment, not to exceed $24,986.
I'll move it.
It's moved by Ms. Krummeller,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any questions or comments on this resolution? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, 19363, resolution authorizing a professional services agreement with Van Note Harvey Associates Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $49,471.28 for professional engineering services. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any questions or comments on this resolution? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 19364, resolution authorizing professional services agreement to Gerald Miller, Esquire of Miller, Porter, Muller, PC, to defend the planning board in the land use litigation not to exceed in the amount of $27,500.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Williamson,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. 19365, resolution authorizing supplemental professional services agreement with Stormwater Management Consulting LLC, SWM Consulting, in the not to exceed amount of $15,000. Total not to exceed amended contract amount of $30,000 for stormwater management development application review services for 2019.
Move.
It's moved by Ms. Krummeller,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. 19366, resolution to award contract to AMP Business Interiors, Trendway Corporation, care of AMP Business Interiors, for the purchase of interior furniture for $21,321.09. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Niedergang. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. 19367, resolution to award a contract to Mid-State Radios for the Fire Department portable radios in the amount of $94,909.71. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Ms.
Second.
Krummeller, seconded by Ms. Fraga. Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. 19368, resolution authorizing the amendment of an existing contract for professional services with Harry Holstatter sorry to butcher your name, Esquire, for professional services for an amount not to be increased by $15,000.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Williamson, seconded by Ms. Krummeler. Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. 19369, resolution approving the professional services agreement to Beloyan Inspection Services for administration of housing rehabilitation programs in the amount not to exceed $15,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Ms. Krummeler. Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda? And is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved
Second.
by Mr. Cohen, second by Ms. Krummeler. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously, and I just want to let people know, we had a closed session before the meeting, and I got some information back during the meeting, so I'd like us to have a quick closed session now so we can wrap things up before we formally adjourn. So is there a motion to move back into closed session?
So moved.
Second.